Hi, everybody, and welcome to a for immediate release interview. I'm Shel Holtz,
And I'm Neville Hobson.
and we are thrilled to have Pete Blackshaw back with us. Pete, this is your fourth appearance, I believe, on FIR, and it's been a while. I think
It
it
has
was
been a while.
it was 2009, I think,
Yeah.
was the last time. But it's great to have you back. I've been following you ever since then. Certainly
Mm.
read your content on LinkedIn and subscribe to your newsletter. So, very anxious to have this conversation. And the reason we reached out to bring you back on FIR interviews is because of some research that you have been doing for a couple of years that has resulted in quite a LinkedIn post and a new book coming out in September. Tell us about all this and yourself.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a native Californian who's here and kind of adopted Cincinnati as my home. I have kind of had a mix of is my two-time startup founder. First one I sold to Nielsen, which was in that space that you and I were talking about, viral complaints and early social media. And and I've always been, if there's any through line across my career, I'd say it's the consumer meets trust meets digital. And both of the books that I've written kind of cover that. But in addition to being a startup founder, I've also worked in lot of the large, multinational corporations, many of whom the types of companies I'm selling to. So I co-founded P&G's first interactive marketing team. Remember when we called it that back then? I was a senior executive at Nielsen after we sold my first startup to them. And then most significantly, I spent 9 years in Switzerland as the global head of digital for Nestle. And ironically, that kind of came in the wake of a bit of a crisis that we all remember, with Greenpeace, where they kind of recruited me in to kind of help to address all of that. And then I did a 5-year stint after Switzerland, was recruited by P&G and Kroger and some of the Cincinnati companies to launch a startup accelerator and did a little bit of work in venture capital. But I've loved being back in the startup world and yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
Terrific. So we should to kind of warm us up. I've got a question to start with.
Yeah.
That is a very, very simple one, actually, Pete. When I was looking into the book that you're publishing and looking at the content, what you're covering, and all that stuff, I saw some huge kind of resonance with what we talk about in FIR. And there's a lot of overlap, which I found really, really exciting because that will fuel some of what we're going to talk about today, I think. But first question, which is kind of a framing question. You've been talking about consumer trust and digital influence since the early social media era, if not earlier than that even. So this is my question. What feels genuinely different about this AI moment compared with previous platform shifts?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what's fundamentally different this time is accountability. I often say that, the big aha for me when I quit my last job to launch BrandRank, my current startup, is that I was shortly after ChatGPT came out, kids were asleep, we were skiing, and I was just doing what I typically do, what I'm sure you guys do all the time, just exercising my curiosity and
Yeah.
then typing in things into ChatGPT like, can Nestle be trusted? Are Pampers diapers really sustainable? And it dawned on me within seconds that this medium that is evolving is the world's greatest BS detector. And we've started to see some of the platforms are really on the extreme side of that, like Anthropic Claude, where you just can't throw spin or slogans at them. They just kind of cut through it. And that was like the big unlock for me. Is like, oh my gosh, this is not only going to become a new purchase funnel, this is going to become really tricky terrain for marketers that are used to controlling the message, managing the spin, maybe getting away with overflated claims. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got to measure this. Someone's going to have to create like a Nielsen ratings of what these answer engines say. And I really wanted to focus. I know there's a lot of players that are out there doing, AEO or GEO, but I really wanted to focus on the hard issues like, oh my gosh, are brands going to be held more accountable for sustainability? Are these very sophisticated LLMs going to just digest an entire supply chain and either say thumbs up or thumbs down? Are and maybe just maybe will brands finally be forced to do some of the things that all three of us have been talking about across the 4 sessions, which is, are they finally going to kind of start responding to feedback? Are they going to start inviting questions? Are they going to start acting more with empathy? Because remember, digital started there. Digital started, we called it interactive, and the whole promise was like, oh, we're going to be able to answer questions for consumers. They're going to come to us. And I remember when I started interactive marketing at P&G, that was like the North Star. And then we kind of moved into targeted advertising at scale. We got very programmatic. We got digital. We kind of forgot about the consumer in control. And now I think that's really waking up. However, one of the things I say in my book is, listen, we totally messed up Search 2.0. And I've talked to the folks that wrote books about that, like John Battelle, are like, oh my gosh, that quickly became a tragedy of the commons. Nobody could tell the difference between organic and paid, and even when it moved to mobile. And we as an industry are going to have to decide, like, do we want to preserve this incredible gift to consumers? And the things that are good for consumers are also really good for business, where they're getting, you know, reliable, trusted, you know, answers that are just solving like everything for them? Or do we want to pollute the commons by moving too aggressively into paid advertising? Do we want to dance in the gray zone? And so the book is kind of the answer economy is this true shift, and we have got to get in front of it to make sure that it is nurtured in the right way. And the timing couldn't have been better, because just last week, all the folks from OpenAI are running all over cons trying to grab ad dollars. And that's good. You need an advertising model, but marketers have a historic tendency of dancing in the gray zone. And I just think we need to really get in front of it. And that's like the heart and soul of the answer economy. We are in a world where the brands that actually answer the questions win. It's such a basic pre-digital concept that now is kind of getting extra life. Brands that tell the truth win. Why? Because the answer engine's kind of call your BS. So so that's kind of the heart of what I'm getting into. And I just think it's a really important conversation. And I'm hoping that it dusts off some of these conversations that we had in the past that maybe just were too damn early.
Yeah, I remember those days, around 2004, when everybody was talking about how we were now going to have brands and consumers engaged in conversation, and this was going to change everything, and really didn't. But Pete, you outlined this prescription of making everything sourced, timestamped, structured, LLM findable. That's good hygiene for sure. But you're describing how to feed the model the inputs it rewards. So if a brand does this well enough, hasn't it just learned to pass Claude rather than actually be trustworthy? I mean, how would Claude or you tell the difference between a brand with real substance and a brand with just a really great brand book of truth?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of that goes hand in hand if you do it right. And again, there's a difference between a verified, trustworthy book of truth and marketing. I mean, they're not the same thing. And so what I've learned, I've been at this for 2 years, have worked with about 80 of the world's top brands, um, big brands that that really, have really challenging issues. In fact, the whole business model started on sustainability, Nestle Canada, and they kind of invited me in for Earth Day. And we really took a hard look at, okay, will Nestle be rewarded or punished? And the good news is that they were severely rewarded, but there are ways where you need to market. And maybe not the word market is the wrong term. You need to make the good work that you're doing discoverable. So, for example, I have found that a lot of the companies that I've worked with are getting lower sustainability scores than they deserve. If you look at their science and their commitments, it's actually pretty damn good. However, they're so backwards on digital strategy that they put all of their science in PDFs, which LLMs can't read. And we call that content liquidity. So it's not about manipulation. It's a lot of it is like about getting the credit that you're due. Now, I say that I don't want to sound naive with that because I realize there's a whole industry that's mushrooming around me that's all about manipulation and gaming and whatever it takes to kind of get credit you probably don't deserve. I'm not playing that game. I think there is so much upside for companies that are actually already doing good things, have products that actually work, have credible supply chains, treat their employees well, that aren't getting the credit they deserve. And I like those challenges. And we've been able to significantly move the needle with a lot of big companies just by making sure that they load up their FAQs with their sustainability commitments that are already verified by third parties, or by these LLMs are very biased towards trust signals. And so we've always known that quality seals, BBB, fair trade, um, good housekeeping, those have always mattered, but they're really important to the LLMs. Because if you think about what's happening right now, they're in a arms race to be the single source of truth. And so they are very, very biased towards trust signals. There's a lot of misinformation out in the marketplace that everybody goes to Reddit first. That's not true at all. They go to the brand websites first because they know those are places where content is typically vetted, reviewed by lawyers. Brands kind of are close to their stuff and they look at that. And then if they don't have what they want, then they'll go to other sources. So what marketers do, what we do is we focus on 3 simple metrics. And I try to, I think a lot of us in the industry are just throwing too much vernacular, too many metrics, and I try to keep it really simple. Visibility. Are you visible? So what's the best podcast show that has to do with, public relations or crisis? I suspect you would probably show up. If not, then I may become your digital coach to make sure you do. Um, Vulnerability is the second one, which is how do you show up? And it's different than sentiment because I often say that visibility gets you seen, vulnerability gets you remembered. And I think companies underestimate the degree to which you can be visible, but in a very negative context. And a good pre-AI example is that when I was running digital at Nestle, Wikipedia was a big pain in the butt because you type in Nestle into Wikipedia and like 40% of the entry had to do with the company's history with activists. And so it was like the gift that kept on punishing all the time. And so, and AI kind of compounds that. It's almost like you can't. So that gets into misinformation, hallucination, and then what I call brand alignment, which is, do the LLMs fundamentally agree with the promise that you're putting out there on your website, your Amazon page, your TV ads? And this is very, very humbling. Sometimes executives throw chairs at me, but that's where the big unlock takes place. The third area is readiness. Do you know how to market to algorithms? And we focus on 3 buckets. Availability. Do you even have available content that algorithms can read? Clarity. Do you speak in a consumer language? And right now, at least, they're very biased toward conversational vernacular, which I think is good. And then the third one is depth, where you have to have substance, the third-party seals, the validation. And so I think right now the criteria they're using is good for the consumer because I think it means the consumer's more likely to get a good and a trusted response. And I think for the good actors out there that actually really, that don't BS and actually live up to their claims, I think they're benefiting as well. But it's going to be a very tricky environment where you're going to have a lot of bad actors that don't deserve to be at the top. They're going to fight the bloody hell to get to the top. And there's going to be a million vendors out there kind of say, we will get you to the top. And so it'll be interesting, but that's why I think we have to really think about like this is our moment right now. Like what type of digital space do we want? We messed up the previous ones. We're 25 years into us. We still are like deluged with spam. My entire phone is loaded with artificial voices pitching me on stuff. None of them are real. And so now we've got this chance to like really nurture something special. Can we do it? I don't know.
It's a good one. It's a good one. Pete, one thing that really struck me is how you describe AI as an auditor rather than simply an information retrieval system. So you say, for instance, AI answer engines are now the auditors of brand credibility. we've talked a lot on FIR about organizations needing a human in the loop for AI. And indeed, there are examples that are large, highly visible, very prominent organizations who've really screwed up on that area by not having a human in the loop. But what you're suggesting, I think, is almost the reverse. AI is now putting organizations themselves in the loop, constantly evaluating whether their behavior matches their claims. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, no, no, exactly. I think and I think there's a number of different, yeah. So what we'll do, it's my favorite part of the model. It's a little bit evil, but it really is crazy insightful to clients. So we'll take your brand promise, and every company has one. Then we'll take like the top 10 claims, oftentimes the things that you're sending out to the marketplace or the analyst, and we will kind of have each of the LLMs interrogate those claims. And then we'll come up with scores 1 to 10. And it's absolutely fascinating. And this is the ultimate unlock in understanding how the algorithms think. Like, and again, in the book, I get into all these different segments. Like, how does Claude think? How does Grok think? I mean, right now, at least, Claude is like the student radical who just is like, doesn't believe the man, is like, and they're just not going to believe marketing whatsoever. And so I did a brand alignment test on our dashboard with Amazon. I've got a dashboard with Amazon. I can send it to you afterwards, where I had Amazon has this statement like Earth's most consumer-centric company, and then, blah, blah, blah. And then I had the LLMs interrogate it. And you know who gave it the lowest score? It was
Claude?
Claude. Claude gave it like a 4 out of 10. And then they got into all these specifics about why they simply don't measure up. Now, the irony and the beauty of that is that, Amazon is a huge partner with Claude. In fact, Claude is what undergirds Rufus or Alexa for shopping. I think Amazon's even put some money into Claude. But, this is like the beautiful irony of these crazy systems. They're kind of holding everyone accountable. And I'm like, and what I've been telling brands lately is that, you got to be really careful before you spend a ton of money on paid advertising, where, people are just one question away from calling your BS. And then the other thing that I think is getting really tricky, and you'll love this. One of the things that I've been doing lately is really telling corporate communications teams, CEOs, boardrooms, design for Claude, because this is one platform that continues to grow and influence. They act like a college radical, and they are absolutely loved, for better or worse, by journalists, NGOs, determined detractors, financial analysts. And so I always say, like, if you can pass the Claude test, you're probably in a good place. And I've actually done briefings with clients before earnings calls where I've literally looked at the data from like Claude, where they're just like, no, we don't believe it. We don't believe it. And they've almost become practice fodder to kind of figure out how do you really. But the point is that, we're in this tricky environment where you got to be really accountable for what you say, because these very, very smart algorithms are like, no, 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 no. I don't necessarily agree with you. And marketers have never lived with that type of accountability. I mean, it's like Spin City, and I've been part of that. And so I do think, the marketers that really have superior products can back their claims, but they're also going to have to think about all these other areas that are going to creep into the algorithmic judgment. Like, I do think you talked about human in the loop, and you had a lot of CEOs, Mark Pritchard was talking about that at Con. I mean, I think everyone's going to be talking that, but these algorithms will kind of know whether you've completely sold everybody out to AI or whether you've kind of kept a blend. And I think some purchase behavior is going to be based on that. I mean, I could see frustrated teenagers that are like already skeptical about AI creating shopping tools that say, I'm only going to buy from companies that don't go too far on AI. It's not difficult to hack, on one of the vibe coding tools.
Pete, you outlined the concept of a brand book of truth. Mentioned that a few minutes ago, and I'd like you to sort of articulate what that is. But if every brand builds one and floods the zone with sourced, time-stamped, LLM findable proof, Does Claude's discernment survive that, or do you end
I
up
do.
in an arms race where the brands with the biggest content budgets win again? And that's the dynamic that you're saying is dead.
Yeah, I do. I think a lot of the listen, I think some of the LLMs will submit to the chaos that you described, but I do think, yeah, I think these, it's interesting because Claude is not as dependent on a paid ad model or getting all their money from subscriptions. So I think the ones that'll get really tricky are OpenAI and some of the other, Google's already a little bit fuzzy, but they're still, you know, wowing consumers with, AI overviews. But yeah, they're just going to have to be really careful about how they blend. But I think it's a fair point. But I do think that when I talk about Book of Truth, it's not just the marketing slogans. It's like how the product's made. It is literally, is it truly superior? And can you verify that? Yeah, how do you stack up versus competition? Who are the people behind the brand? What's the supply chain behind the brand? They're kind of looking for all those different ingredients, even for the purpose of like Amazon. I mean, this stuff is so real. I just put out a note to my clients this morning. I put a little blurb on LinkedIn as well, but Amazon Prime Day was really insightful. I didn't go to con last year, but I did stay glued for 4 days straight on Prime Day, and it was probably the biggest conversational boost we've seen in the history of commerce. Almost every single, now it's like every product you look at is surrounded by questions. I mean, what the hell's going on? And then a lot of we saw a lot of advertising trying to work into that. But on that platform, you can go in there and say, is this product sustainable, or should I buy sustainable products? Or should I mean, and it'll really give you very, very deep perspective before they start shoving products your way. And that is an absolute game changer. And I do think like the smart retailers will want to make sure that the consumer kind of gets what they need. So I may be, long way of saying I'm optimistic. Where it could get scary, is if where everything got out of whack before was that Google was a monopoly and they had like 90% market shares because they can do whatever they want. I do think because you've got genuine competition, there is this real effort to like provide maximum value to the consumer. And that's why I say we're in a moment. The answer economy is a moment. Either we're going to screw it up like we did before, or we're going to kind of turn it into a true win-win for consumers and business alike. But it'll take some work to do that right.
Hmm. Interesting, that is. I've been thinking when I listen to what you're saying, Pete, a question I need to, I'm really curious about this because I've been asking myself this question as I try to figure out where we're at with all of this. What do you think? Could two different AI models, whether it's Claude and ChatGPT or any two, develop materially different views of the same company, the same brand? What will that look like, do you think?
Oh, I do this every day for clients. We literally kind of we filter them through all the major LLMs, from ChatGPT to DeepSeek to Perplexity and Grok. They all have different personalities. It's no different than going after influencers, right? And influencers
Yeah.
kind of, they beat to different drummers. And and again, I would say Claude is the extreme librarian. They just don't like marketing BS. They kind of just focus on the facts, the credentialing, the science. Um, you know, Grok is almost like hard to predict, and they do lean on a lot of the former tweets that kind of fall into it. But they are a little bit. They almost like personify not the politics of Elon Musk, but definitely like the almost like the unpredictable side of him
Hmm.
and what you see. It's like a different personality. Um, Gemini still, it's the it depends on if you're looking at Gemini AI overviews. I mean, they all have different thinking processes in terms of the way they synthesize data, but absolutely. And I would say the new, you know, just in the same way that like a PR term might say, we've got to figure out how to break through the New York Times, the Financial Times, and so on. So you got to think the same way. It's like they think differently, they source differently. And so I spent the whole weekend doing this fascinating source analysis where I looked at, tens of thousands of prompts, and then I analyzed the sources, and they have different favorites. And just recently, the New York Times is finally starting to creep into open AI, which does start to impact the character of their output. Um, Claude tends to look a little bit more seriously at Consumer Reports than Joe's review site. And so you have to know this. I mean, this is like the new PR. This is like the new influencer management. If you do not know how these LLMs think, if you don't know what their brand archetype is, if you don't know what they eat for breakfast from a content perspective, you're not on top of what your client needs, in my view.
I have a follow-up
Yeah.
to that question. Does this mean a brand needs to have a message strategy for every LLM, or is there a through line that satisfies them all?
I don't know if they have to have different messages, but they need to be very attentive to how they are filtered. I do think all the LLMs, um, like for example, in my analysis this weekend, they all pay a lot of attention to your brand website. Far more than I think the media has led on. And I know because I've just run like a million audits and I see this all the time. And so brands have a lot of leverage in influencing the story, especially when there's bad information out there and the brand website or the owned media is in a position to kind of correct the record. And we've done some really interesting work around crisis or recalls where some brands have been able to actually train the LLMs within 12, 24 hours based on getting that right information in there. But yeah, I mean, so I don't think brands need to over customized. I think they need to be very, I mean, if I were heading corporate communications today, I would probably say, yeah, there's some that I would focus on the ones that are most critical, you know, and the ones that are most critical often have also tend to be the most loved by other influencers that we care about, like journalists and NGOs and the like. And um, so that's where I would kind of put the focus on in that. Now that said, they're all going to be introducing, with the exception of Claude, advertising models. And so those will be micro opportunities to influence. And we saw, a lot of that, OpenAI is already doing a lot of that. And there's going to be, they're going to have to study like, you know, is it appropriate to advertise? I do have a strong point of view there that if you have high vulnerability, you shouldn't advertise. If you have low vulnerability, but low visibility, I'd say, yeah, spend all the money you want on advertising. But brands are going to have to be really sensitive they're going to have to learn the art of not making things worse. And I don't think brands, I mean, again, going back to the conversations that we've had for 20 years, brands don't know how to manage conversations. They're like, most brands are barely there on like the first question. But in the answer economy, I have this term that I use in the book called ask through, not click through. Click through is like, if I can just get that one click. You and I know we're using these tools all the time. It's a sequence of questions. You go in there with a health query and it's like multiple, and every single additional question that's satisfied that gets you further down the sale or further down the path of happiness. And like brands don't know how to do that at all. And so, but the second you submit to these ad models where you're sitting right in the middle of the prompt, you almost have to you almost have to know that stuff. So this is going to be really tricky. It's not going to be one of those push a button kind of get media. There's going to be a whole accountability that comes with it when you're kind of in the answer stream.
Let me go back to, I guess, something we discussed just a short while ago. In fact, Shel's question about should brands ever tailor themselves differently for different models, which if I understood you right, Pete, you basically say that's ultimately a dead end, not really what they should be doing. So I'm thinking, you mentioned Claude hates marketing BS or corporate spin or whatever it might be. And you describe the models like Claude and like Grok, etc., almost as having editorial personalities or value systems. But that's fascinating, I think, because I've sometimes questioned that myself, because organizations brand managers have spent years trying to create one consistent narrative about their brand or their organization. So I think the question I had originally was worded, are we? In other words, a question. I think it's more like we are as opposed to are we, which is entering a world where communicators have to understand not just audiences, but different AI worldviews. And I think it is interesting. My experience in this is not deliberate trying to get an answer to this, but I use myself usually a mixture between Claude and ChatGPT. So I alternate between the two.
Yeah.
Claude is more rounded and rich because I fed it with so much information about who I am, a lot more than ChatGPT has, that I'm okay with literally asking vague questions a lot of the time, and it never disappoints, my experience so far. ChatGPT is a little bit more nurturing in that regard, although it does surprise me at times with the depth of answers I get to some things when I'm doing research. So I guess I confuse myself because I have no idea what the answer to this is. But I think it is something communicators should think about. Those who haven't settled on one, notwithstanding the topic Shel and I've talked about recently, where shadow AI is growing like crazy in companies as people use their own thing, ignore what the company says. So, what would you? What would your advice be to communicators in this
You're
earth?
nailing it. I mean, this is the new influencer marketing, right? That's always been at the core of like issues management and communication.
Yeah.
And you have to know your influencer. You have to know their hot buttons. You have to know their biases. You got to know, how they evolve. And there is a lot of evolution. And again, this is where I think we may find a year from now that, hey, they're patty cakes with brands because they want the ad dollars. Who knows? I don't know. but yeah, and brands need to think this through. And I didn't want you to think, you made the comment about dead end. I obsess with the nuances of platforms, but I'm not convinced brands need to over tailor the message to different. I think there's a few where they got to be really careful about the BS factor, like Anthropic, where it's just, they just got to make sure that their claims can hold water with these judges and these filters that are processing their information. And I really think brands are just, they're not ready. In fact, what I've concluded is that across all the major, Fortune 1000 companies, they're only like 20% AI ready. I mean, the most obvious thing is, you know, and sometimes companies get, annoyed with me. And I have been doing this all the way back from my plan and feedback days, but like most companies cannot answer questions. I mean, you can go to after this podcast, go to your favorite brands and like type in a really basic question, like, how do I use the product? What's in the product? Is it sustainable? 90% of the time, they're going to slap you in the face with a pop-up ad. They're either going to fire a blank or they're going to answer something completely differently. Like brands don't know how to do this. In the last 25 years of digital, the most basic human need of interactivity, I want to question. Brands can't do it, including the big ones. They get all the awards and spend all the money. It's crazy. And there's a lot of people on the inside that are like, it doesn't matter. That doesn't pay out. Or consumer services was always considered a non-strategic cost center. But again, I'm sort of saying the answer economy, that's the new purchase funnel. Like this is the new skill that we need to learn. So it's not only how to influence the algorithms, it's almost like how do we fundamentally change our mindset where we're more receivers of intent. And then we have to use that as the new engagement. To some extent, when someone Amazon CEO had a great quote that everybody in marketing should put on their forehead, where he basically said, it was so beautifully simple. He was doing an earnings call and he's talking about the progress of Amazon Rufus, which I think at that time was already generating like $10 billion in incremental sales. And he said, hey, it's pretty simple. Every consumer that asks one question is 60% more likely to buy. And this is almost like the North Star that brands have always been looking for in terms of engagement, right? A click, half the time you're trying to get rid of the brand, right? It's like, get out of my face. A question is like a big lean in where if you can't convert that. And so I think brands need to understand that, like, inviting the consumer to ask a question, making the website more receptive to questions, not only wins with the consumer, but it builds your database to feed LLMs. Because where brands are underrepresented in all the LLMs, that book of truth is partly an inventory issue. It's like you have to have enough scenarios, how to use the product, what's it's made of, blah, 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 to even start to market the algorithms, and brands don't do that. You're lucky if you see maybe 20 FAQs, and of course, brands could be problem solvers for like a million things if you do it right. Tech companies are very good. So I want to be careful here. Tech companies, I think, are very good. Apple has a fantastic and have for many years pre-AI have just bent over backwards to make content available when you have a challenge. And that's why almost every Apple question you ask through an LLM is like pretty much right. Same thing with Microsoft. I think
Hmm.
tech companies have always been good at having a lot of FAQs and knowledge. Bigger brands that spend the big bucks on the Super Bowl are really, really, I got to be careful what I say, have opportunities.
Uh, Pete, in chapter 9, you see, I actually
Yeah.
went through the book. You argue that the next big comms crisis isn't going to be a social media firestorm, but an AI generated answer a brand can't correct, because the infrastructure for rebuttal was never built. This is really interesting. I was just on a panel in Covington, Kentucky, by the way. If I'd known you
Oh,
were in
no way.
Cincinnati, I'd have given you a call, uh, where we talked about pre-bunking as a way to address crises, that you've got all this content out there already. But you're saying the crisis is going to come because they haven't done this. The content isn't there to rebut what the LLM is saying. Can you walk me through what that crisis
Yeah.
actually looks like and why the old crisis playbook is not going to be effective in these circumstances?
Well, one of the big issues that I've had with a lot of our top clients is about kind of crisis and governance, which is that, winning with answers is a governance issue. And it's a big reason why I'm been really hesitant to, suggest that this is all about SEO 2.0, or this is something that the search manager deals with. I mean, if your brand is as strong as your answers, a lot of people are implicated. And I think where companies really struggle in crisis is figuring out who owns it and who's accountable. And I do think, I do make a pretty strong pitch in the book that brands have really need to get in front of this. And, there's an accountability. Like they're bullshit detectors. Who's accountable? They're kind of saying your products aren't made the way you claim. Who's accountable? There's all sorts of legal liability issues, and I think we are just in the very early stages. At some point, you'll need to interview my co-founder Hank Hudipole, who's doing some really breakthrough work around hallucination and accuracy. But you've got states that are now filing laws that if if the answer comes out wrong, even through an LLM, you are liable. Think about that in the health zone, right? And
Mhm.
so who is responsible? Is that the marketing team? Is that so there's a I think brands need to start thinking now, and I'm having a lot of leadership meetings and summits on this topic. They've really got to figure out the governance area here. And and it's one reason why we're trying to keep the metrics relatively simple so they really have a clear eye into what's going on. It's a big reason why we put almost, I'd say, vulnerabilities is kind of at the top of the list. But let me tell you what you get if you have governance. So, without naming names, yeah, we work with some brands that have had very, very severe crisis issues where misinformation is, even from the government, is kind of stirring up the pot in terms of, how the answer engines, and you've got to get R&D to the table. You got to get legal, compliance, marketing, even the CEO, they need to kind of play a critical role. And the good news is there is I've done a lot of boardroom discussions, and there's a lot of heightened sensitivity when a CEO says, "My daughter just typed in this and they say we're this." You know? And they're like, "Why the hell is that? Who's responsible?" So, but yeah, these issues are really, really tricky, and a lot of stakeholders need to come together. And that is, and I think it'll probably be a little bit blurry in terms of who owns it. Like right now, brands have these AI heads of AI. I don't know if those jobs will last very long. Sometimes, are they gatekeepers? Are they enablers? Are they just, I mean, AI is now kind of part of everything. So I think who owns what will be a bit fluid for the coming years.
Yeah, that's really good.
Is that
Um,
helpful?
I think it is. Yep. So it's actually interesting, Pete, what you're saying. Listening to how you describe, it amazes me how some companies just are so off the trail with a lot of what they need not to be in that position. They need to truly pay attention to where this is all going. We've mentioned this in a number of episodes where we could, share many examples of where we see instances of where that is simply not happening. So let's talk about AI
But
agents.
in fairness,
Yeah. Mm.
let's just put this in perspective. We're still only a little over 3 years into this.
Yeah.
I mean, we're up to like 5 billion prompts a day, and this stuff started 3 years ago. So, yeah, companies are always going to be slow. But the good news with this, I do feel like there's a feeling of a sense of urgency. Like it's a bit of an oh shit moment. Like we've got to figure this out. And so, and then, how do you really capitalize on this? And even it's funny, like launching a startup, the one thing you dread is like, oh my gosh, it's going to take forever to get a vendor number. And we've had some companies that typically take like 3 years to get a little small startup in Cincinnati a vendor number for literally 3 weeks. So I do think there's a memo, there's a bell that's ringing inside the organization. It's like, oh shit, the purchase funnel has changed. Um, we are really accountable. Every stock analyst is now digging up dirt on us. Or good news, through these tools, we've got to act. Then they're like, well, who owns this? Is it it's digital, right? No. Well, wait, maybe it's R&D because they've got the most substance, to kind of put to the table, but we don't really think about them as marketing or is it sales? It's just like, it's a bit of a cluster right now, but it's a good conversation. Companies really haven't had this discussion in earnest for a long time. I think digital is like conveniently tucked into marketing. And now you've got a whole different world order that companies need to think through. And it's going to be a really big test for like CEOs out there. Who gets it? CEOs are going to play a critical role in orchestrating this stuff. And, we've been working with a few companies that I won't name where the CEOs have made a massive difference and in kind of leading, organizations where nobody's really accountable for doing it to like getting organized around it.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more stories of people, organizations who really are on the ball with all this, because I'm getting tired of hearing all the stories about these companies who are not. They're not that they've dropped the ball; they haven't even grasped the ball yet. In fact, Shel and I have talked on a couple of episodes, two conflicting surveys. One about how CEOs are really coming to the fore and taking control of developing AI rollouts in their companies, and are providing leadership and are doing all these things. Then another survey has completely conflicting information to that. So, I mean, you just got to go visit LinkedIn and you'll see conflicts all over the place, including everyone's got an ebook they want to sell you. That's the kind of magic
It depends
bullet
on how
handbook.
you classify it. Yeah, I've read all those studies too, and
Yep.
and my view is like a lot of this is it an AI strategy? Is it something you should have been doing
Right.
a
Right.
while ago? So I posted something last week, and almost as a little bit of a counterpoint to the con lions, because I was kind of like, why don't they ever give love or rewards or recognition to brands that just answer the boring question, right? At some point, we're just going to say, God, that brand really went out of their way. We should have a recognition. So I just created what I called, the answer cans. And so, and I started
Yeah.
like, and I cited some of the companies that I wrote about in the book and I don't even think they used the word AI. Like Yeah. What do you think is one of the best index companies on the web right now in AI that just shows up consistently? Well, I'll give you a little hint. So if you ask anything related to like sustainability, like what company shows up first? It's like
Hmm.
Patagonia. They're everywhere. They're everywhere.
Okay.
Now, I doubt they even use the word AI there, but they have been absolutely committed to driving radical transparency in their products, flooding their content with meaningful content. Um, and they have been training the LLMs for years. Um, Sephora, a brand in beauty that's always been very come to the counter, I will answer you questions. I think that model lives in the way they approach digital as well. They are severely rewarded by the LLMs. I mentioned a few of the I mentioned a few of the tech companies that do that particularly well. A lot of young companies that don't have big bucks for advertising, they are very intuitive about everybody that goes to my website could be my last customer. So let's just give them the love of knowledge, of guidance, whatever they want. They are being disproportionately benefited. In fact, one of the things that I have found is that, and I work with a lot of big companies that own massive budget. I've consistently found that, for big companies, market share under indexes, over indexes answer share, which means that the younger companies they're kind of winning on answer share, partly just because it's not like they're trying to spike the system. They're just wired to answering questions. And so this is where the thesis of the book is really simple. I'm almost trying to say this without all the buzzwords and the tech gobbledygook. It's sort of like if you treat the consumer, you know, if you kind of create a bit of a Wikipedia to kind of help the consumer answer every question, you will win big time in the AI world. I have seen that correlation left and right. Instead, most brands make it really complicated. We need an AI strategy. We need an AI strategy for the AI strategy we need. They create all these damn layers. And then you go to their website and they still can't answer a question. And so that's why I'm almost like forcing the question. It's like, the answer economy, not the AI world, the answer economy. And so we'll see if I'm successful or not.
Hmm.
All of this, when I picture somebody actually doing the things that you talk about, not from the brand perspective, but from the consumer perspective, I see them going to a chatbot and entering a question. Sam Altman has been laser focused on the transition from conversational assistants, the chatbots, toward autonomous workflow executing agents. And he says this is a shift you're going to see in the front end of ChatGPT. God knows I spend as much time in Claude Cowork as I spend in Claude. What is this shift toward agents, assuming all of the LLMs move in this direction? What does that do to this whole concept?
Yeah, listen, I mean, I write about it a lot in the book, and the subtitle is how AI agents will decide your brand's future. Um, Yeah, so a lot's gonna be delegated, but I don't think it's gonna I think there's a little bit of overhyping that consumers are gonna completely, like, delegate everything to agencies. I'm not, and I frankly, I enjoy, the ask through of asking health questions. It's sort of
Hmm.
like, and so I don't there are gonna be certain areas where we're gonna be totally comfortable with, like, delegating to agents. There are other areas where we're just gonna wanna be more in control of it, and so, um but I don't think what I've said earlier impacts any of that. I would say that in an agentic world, brands still need to catalog their truth and make it marketable and make it visible. And you could almost argue that it's going to be more important to get your act together on marketing the algorithms. Because here's one of the things that's going to be really, really tricky for brands, especially in like these industries that I've worked in, like consumer goods, food, is the algorithms have a very strong bias towards store brands and private label. Now, it's not because they're tilting the scale in their favor. It's just that in an agentic world, think about what consumers are going to do. they're almost going to be brand agnostic. And they say, give me good product at a good price for my family of 4, right? And they might even set a spec, like it's got to have X% product performance. And then the algorithms are going to do their homework and they're come back and they say Kirkland. And then they're going to be saying Kirkland, Walmart equate, because you're going to find that these store brands and retailers are getting really good at volunteering what their products do, even their green scores, where, if we over delegate to agents, I do think brands are in for a really rude awakening that a lot of the grocery lists are full of private label, where it may be the Kirkland product may be 90% of the product superiority of the comparable brand, but at like half the price. And so this is where, so what brands are going to have to do, whether they're preparing for tough questions from consumers like us, or preparing for these agents that are going to go looking for relevant data to kind of render a judgment, they're still going to have to train them. They're going to have to really think about, how to do that the right way. Now, we may see different things evolve. Like I've talked a lot about the word website. I'm probably going to write a column that suggests that maybe we need a new name called, an inventory locker that's kind of like very, very agent friendly. But yeah, I think brands, everybody's waxing poetic about agents, but I keep reminding brands, like, careful what you ask for on this one, because you are not prepared and you are going to be really, really surprised at what these agents are recommending. And you're going to probably lose even more control. So brands are going to have to really think about that one carefully.
So to that point then, if AI agents increasingly recommend products, services, suppliers, even employers, companies to work for instance, what happens to traditional brand marketing?
Well, I think it's going to have to wrap around a lot of that. I mean, listen, I mean, branding has always been in the, you know, content marketing's been a big thing well before AI, but they will have to, keep doing some of that, but they may need to dial down the BS factor. They may need to dial down the hyperbole. They may have to dial down the exaggeration. I mean, here's one of the things that's happening. You've got two very interesting trends going on. You've got the answer economy, you got the creator economy. Everybody at Con was gaga about the creator economy. There's no question the creator economy is creating massive reach. But hey, one of the interesting things about the creator economy, they do not index and answer engines. Maybe a little bit meta because they've got they've got, Instagram, but generally, the creators are not getting the love from the answer engines. And why is that? I think they're very hesitant. There tends to be a lot of hyperbole and exaggeration among the creator economy of what the products do. And I think, and sometimes they're paid, but they're not disclosed. And so it's a complicated area for the algorithms to kind of take seriously. And so I just think, all these things are going to have to be really, really carefully thought through, as brands try to, I probably haven't used the word trust enough. I think what's going to be more important than ever goes back to our very, very, very first conversation when we're talking about the rise of blogs. But yeah, brand trust will be critical. And I do think the brands that really think hard about what that means are going to win. And I know brand trust tends to be a little fluffy. I've even had investors like, what the hell? How the hell does trust sell cases? But we all know that trust is the currency of advertising and all relationships. And I think AI is just going to magnify that in a big way. So brands are probably going to have to really double down in that particular area.
What about B2B? Is it the same situation? Do
No
they need to
different.
think differently? No different.
No different. I mean, every B2B supplier is using ChatGPT to vet other suppliers to vet. If anything, I think B2B is going to get a massive turbocharge. I do think AI systems are, I have to worry about that too. It's like I got RFPs with other, big companies, and they're kind of using AI to basically kind of, do their research on us versus competition. But no, I think it's kind of, I mean, I've done scorecards. I have all sorts of indexes that I've created, including a B2B one on what are the best vendors across all these different areas, who shows up, who doesn't. And now there may be my guess isn't on the B2B side. Claude will again probably be the one that is most, most focused on. Actually, I think Copilot isn't bad either, but yeah, there probably will be some favorites that the procurement officers use as they're trying to figure out who's the right vendor that's out there. But zero difference in my view.
Hmm. Okay. So what would you advise communication professionals to start doing differently tomorrow morning?
Well, I think they need to look in the mirror, which is, an AI
Mhm.
is a mirror, and they should, really uh, get their organization internalizing this new reality that your brand is as strong as its answers, and these new
Mhm.
influencers are shaping their answers. And so I would number 2, I would tell every communications professional that they have more leverage than they realize. That brand website, especially the corporate website, which I think generally are more optimized for curiosity than brand sites. Brand sites are very optimized for conversion. If you go to a corporate site, Nestle.com, I think they've done a really, really good job. They even have a section called Ask Nestle, which I love, and have encouraged them to kind of take to the next level. But all that probably is more valuable than it was a year ago. And I wouldn't, and I think some of those things are underfunded. Some of them are afterthoughts. Some of those are like, oh, that's the brochure, but that is really powerful. And I also think corporate communications in particular has a lot of leverage to lead, because it's really hard to get like 50 brands within the franchise to kind of like get their act together. And I do think the book of truth may be best developed at the corporate level, but then again, it has to be tomorrow's definition of corporate communications. I think if you ask brands, they'd say corporate communications is backwards. They slow things down. They're naysayers. They're not a
Mhm.
progressive force in the organization. They're overly conservative. And if I were heading corporate communications, I would be, no, 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 no. We are the lever to win in the answer economy. We have always been sensitive about substance, you know, doing what we say, checking off the compliance boxes. Those are all the things that really matter to the LLMs. So yeah, if I were giving that that college football speech to, corporate communications, I would be saying, my friends, this is your day. And
Mhm.
let's look in the mirror and let's go. And let's make our CEO a hero, because, the stakes are going to go up. We're not going to get the credit we deserve unless we're more proactive, but we can. Something like that.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
remember Richard Edelman saying that about social media, and it just didn't happen. Pete, you probably remember from your previous appearances that we always end with the same question, and that is, what didn't we ask that we probably should have, or that you were expecting us to?
Oh gosh, what didn't you ask? I don't know. You did. I was surprised you didn't ask. So, Pete, did you use AI to help write your book?
But you did. In fact, you got a really good page in the
Did you
galleys that
like
I
that?
saw.
I love
Explain,
that
yeah,
page. I love
yeah,
that.
that is super what you wrote. Really, really, and
I
truly, it
love
it
that. And I
adds.
did. The funny thing is, like, I mean, listen. I mean, you know, sometimes I'll take a chapter, throw it in the clod, and say, "Tell me I'm full of shit." And it's like, but it was all me. But it did help me navigate. And I have
Yeah,
this term that I use called dog walk journalism. I'll take my dog on a walk and I'll bark out my random thoughts. And AI is wonderful at connecting the first thought with the last thought and kind of giving you a starting point. But I did have this really intense editor. Her name was Angela Morrison. And she was actually the editor, the partner to William Safire, who wrote the column on
yeah.
language. So she was really good. She had this really intense um, Long Island drawl, and she's like, "Pete, don't take it personally, but I am totally blunt." But oh my gosh, she like took me to town on indefinite pronouns. I felt like I had never learned writing, but that was like it was like a great human in the loop epiphany, because she was
Mm.
hitting things that even the LLMs could not catch. And I was reading the book, I was like, oh my God, I'm so blessed to have had a really good editor.
If I ever work with
Uh,
her, I'll be sure to have my copy of Strunk and White by my side.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you know of any, you guys bump into all sorts of folks in court. One of my goals, I really want to wake up a lot of corporate communications departments. That's my sweet spot. I've always loved the balance of brand defense and offense. But the defense side is, I think, more urgent and more challenging. So yeah, as you know, I'll be doing a lot of wake up call speeches and workshops. But yeah, if you know folks that need the help, let me know.
Cool.
And how can people get in touch with you?
No, just Pete at brandrank.ai or theanswereconomy.com. Or they just type my name into an answer engine, and they can vet me first. And but yeah, it's I'll give it to you as well when you advertise the podcast. But yeah, it was great talking to you guys. I miss our conversations.
Yeah, likewise. That was good. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks so much, Pete.
You bet. Always.